There is no doubt that the Prophet ﷺ, whenever he spoke the truth. And whatever sunnah he set, an example he left for us, is the best of examples. And he ﷺ said, النكاح من سنتي. Nikah, marriage, a contract of marriage is from my sunnah. فَمَنْ رَغِبَ عَنْ سُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. Whoever strays away from my sunnah, then he's not from me or from my followers. Everyone here in this hall, in this masjid today, are one of three. Either they are married, or they're a bit too young or yet to make that life decision, or they've made that decision and have gone their separate ways from someone else. But there is no doubt, إِمَّا مُقْبِلٌ عَلَى الزَّوَاجِ. Either you are going to approach marriage, or you are settled in your marriage, or you are in a troublesome phase. These are the sorts of marriages that we have, and the sorts of relationships that we have. But we live in a day and age where there is advocates for different types of marriages and relationships, and there are Muslims that are falling within the haram and the zina, and their excuse often is how difficult marriage is, and how difficult it is to be married, and how difficult it is to stay married. Every masjid will tell you that you go to, and perhaps, and I hope this is not putting off some of the people that are not married, every masjid that you go to will tell you that the list of complaints and the list of people that approach the Imam is only growing more and more by the day. And the reasons people approach the Imam are only getting sillier and sillier by the day. We used to be, or when we look back at the example of the Prophet ﷺ, we see the best of example in all aspects of life, and the best of examples in marriage. The Prophet ﷺ married. He married more than once. And every single one of those marriages was perfect in its nature. Different to the other one, but perfect nonetheless. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged his companions to get married. The Prophet ﷺ facilitated marriage for his companions. He married his daughters to his closest companions, such as Ali radiallahu anhu and Uthman ibn Affan, who he married two of his daughters to. And the Prophet ﷺ told his companions about the rights and responsibilities that these women have over their husbands. He ﷺ stood in his most famous sermon in Hajjatul Wada', a sermon where 100,000 of the companions, men of the Prophet ﷺ, had gone with him to Hajj, stood and heard the Prophet ﷺ give his famous address. 5 paragraphs that the Prophet ﷺ spoke about. The last of them, he said, أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ إِنَّ لِنِسَائِكُمْ عَلَيْكُمْ حَقًّا. That your women have right upon you. And if you were to think who the Prophet ﷺ was saying this to, the Bedouins, the Arabs at that time, that did not understand the rights and responsibilities, and they did not give their wives any right whatsoever. A girl, when she is born, she's buried young, and if even she escaped that phase, then she's in an abusive, controlling relationship that she has no say. And the Prophet ﷺ is breaking these social barriers, saying that your women have right upon you. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, أَخَذْتُمُوهُنَّ بِأَمَانَةِ اللَّهِ, that you've taken them with the trust, with the amana of Allah Azza wa Jal. وَاسْتَحْلَلْتُمْ فُرُوجَهُنَّ بِكَلِمَةِ اللَّهِ, and you've made it halal, you consummated this marriage with the word of Allah Azza wa Jal. And then he said, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ فِي النِّسَاءِ وَاسْتَوْصُوا بِهِنَّ خَيْرًا, that have taqwa of Allah Azza wa Jal in your women, وَاسْتَوْصُوا بِهِنَّ خَيْرًا, and have good tawsiyah with them, meaning that look after them in that which is goodness. And then he concluded by saying, أَلَا هَلْ بَلَّغْتُ Oh, witness that I have delivered. Allahumma fashhad, oh Allah, witness that I have delivered. Now, given the standard that the Prophet ﷺ set, and we can give so many examples of his life, there is no doubt that some of us may think that the life of the Prophet ﷺ with his spouses was free of issues. The truth is, they were both human. He and his wives. And he had his own issues in his house. Like all of us have some of our issues in our house. As a matter of fact, the Prophet ﷺ had issues with some of his wives. And he left his house and he stayed in the masjid for 30 days, 1 month, staying away from his wives, not talking to them and them not talking to him, as a means of conflict resolution, to find the solution for the issue that they had. Now, if someone amongst us, their wife was not to speak to them for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, a week, they will be knocking at Imam Abid's office saying, what's the procedure for divorce? This lady here does not know respect. Does she not know who I am? Does she not respect her husband? Why is she? And the ego comes in. And we forget the best of example of the Prophet ﷺ that we had an example in. So I wanted to look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And what example can we take in terms of sorting out the issues that we have in our household? All of us have issues. All of us have problems. And if you're not married, you're living at home with your parents, you may be witness to problems between your father and your mother. You may be raised looking at your father and mother having their own problems and issues at home, and you feel caught up in the middle. But the truth is, no house is empty of problems. The first of those things, the first thing that we must understand, and this is the biggest failing of most couples, is that this is not an enemy that you are talking to. That regardless of what the problem is, regardless of what the trouble is, this should be the person that you love the most. Regardless of what the issue is at that moment in time. Do you think you are going to be compatible hand in hand, no issues, no disagreements? All of a sudden you sign your nikah, now your food is the same, your taste in clothes is the same, your taste in home decor is the same, your activities are... No, you're still two independent people that are sinking into the cycle of marriage, and people find that difficult. All of a sudden I want my element of authority not to be questioned at home. Knowing that you are different. But difference does not allow you to break the respect. Some men here in front of me, they speak to their wives in a derogatory term that they would never speak to their sisters or their mothers or their aunties with. As a matter of fact, they find a sense of courage and overpowering over the wife that they would never find against another friend of theirs. So they treat the wife worse than they treat anyone else. And if they feel oppressed at work, overworked, overburdened, where do I find my release? On exercising my power over my wife. The Prophet ﷺ stood on his minbar in front of all of his companions. He said that some of the women of Medina came to him and they complained about their husbands. And he said, those men are not from the best amongst you. The Prophet ﷺ said, خياركم وخيركم خيركم لأهلي. The best of you is the best to his family. وأنا خيركم لأهلي. And I am the best to my family. The element of respect. Withholding a standard of respect that is higher than you would hold for anyone else. Because you've taken this person in your house by the amana of Allah Azza wa Jal and the word of Allah Azza wa Jal. The second thing, Quranic advice, فَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. If we were to dedicate a series of khutab and lectures and seminars and conferences for these two words, we would never do them justice. فَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. inhabit them with ma'roof. Ma'roof is all kind of goodness. The Prophet ﷺ used to choose the best of names for his wife Aisha radiallahu anha. The Prophet ﷺ used to know what name she liked and what name would make her giggle and what name would make her laugh. Do you know what your wife's favorite name is? Do you know what she enjoys that you call her? Are you someone that when you are angry you find filthy terms to address your wife with? When Aisha radiallahu anha was upset, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's ego did not start saying, you know, how can you be upset? I am better than you, I am your husband. No. He softened her with his words. He chose words to soften her. Ma'roof is knowing what your wife's favorite gifts are and buying it for her. Ma'roof, that which is best, is knowing when your wife is upset and how you approach her. Ma'roof, knowing when your wife is angry and how you can calm her down. Ma'roof, that which is best, is the people around you knowing the love that you have for your wife. That which is best. The third point that I want to make when it comes to relationships. The relationship is between you and your partner. There is no doubt there is going to be some negativity. The minute other people only know negative about you and your relationship, then you are doomed. There are people amongst us, ungrateful individuals, husbands and wives, that if you were to ask them about their spouse, they can tell you all of the negative things. They can tell you, and they are happy to share stories about how bad they are, and how they don't cook their favorite food, and how they don't do this, and how they don't do that, and how this is missing, and how that's missing. Akhi, I was just asking you, I didn't need to know all your problems. But the truth is, if all of the goodness that they have in their house, no one would hear about it. Ever. Why? Because that's the negative mindset that they have. Many people don't understand that when you are in a speaking phase, when you are meeting people, you only see the best side of them. You only get to see the side that they want to show you. When you encounter people at work, you're only going to see the best and utmost professionalism from them. But when you are at home, you get to see everything. The good, the bad, the difficulties, the hardship, the sickness, the strength, the weakness. You get to see the vulnerabilities. And if you can't shoulder the responsibility, maybe you shouldn't be married yet. And then others don't understand that the shaitan targets those who are married. That it's a big target on the back of everyone that is married. The shaitan has his soldiers come close to him. Those who are able to separate people. So in their house, there is no protection from the shaitan. There's no safeguard in the house. You hear the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that Surah Al-Baqarah is protection for the house. When was the last time Surah Al-Baqarah recited by you in your house? When? When was the last time you read your adhkar al-sabah and masa in your house? When was the last time you safeguarded yourself by these du'as and adhkar? You know there's an animosity between you and the shaitan. And the shaitan wants to divert you away from this halal marriage that you are in and guide you towards what? Haram, zina. So many of our younger people and even the older people have fallen into that trap of zina, into the haram of zina, have fallen into that temptation and desire. And their excuse, it's always the fault of the spouse. They did not fulfill my needs, so I felt like I had to do something. I had to find something else. So going back to what I was saying, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to households, if you are not married, one day you will be. And one day you will understand that even though you had an idealistic approach in your life, in your mind, that marriage is going to be all fairy and rosy, marriage comes with some absolute highs, but has some challenges. And one day, if you are married, you will realize the value of the person that you have. The value of this individual that you married. And then you will understand where you have gone wrong. Marriage is one of the most sacred institutes of Islam. Allah Azza wa Jal revealed His revelation. And the Prophet ﷺ gave us his Sunnah. And when we come to marry here, we say we marry upon the book of Allah Azza wa Jal and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And these are perfect. So if you have issues in your marriage, then the truth is everyone has issues in their marriage. The way you handle it shows us, are you from the best of people like the Prophet ﷺ said, or are you from the worst? أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله على إحسانه والشكر له على توفيقه وامتنانه وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له تعظيما لشأنه وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أما بعد. Two final points to conclude. أولا, that when it comes to marriages, Al-Islam actually put a system of conflict resolution. The way you approach it, avoiding each other, not speaking, escalating, and then if it reaches a level where you are not understanding each other, فَابْعَثْهُ حَكَمًا مِّنْ أَهْلِهِ وَحَكَمًا مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا. Bring a mediator from his family and a mediator from her family. Find someone that is respectful within your family that wants the best for you. Oftentimes, when this reaches that level, and sometimes even here in the masjid, when families get involved, you would find that the ego of the family is even bigger than the ego of the husband and the wife. You know who we are? We gave your daughter like this, our son is like that. You are supposed to be the ones that are sorting out the problem and the solution. And that's a responsibility upon people in the families that if they were ever to be called into, it's not your job to gossip. It's not your job to psychoanalyze. It's not your job to get into the mindset of the husband and the wife. It's your job to find and mediate between them a resolution. And that's for even spouses that are struggling. Find people that you trust from his family and her family, so the bias doesn't exist. And if you are struggling to do so, then seek help. But don't be individuals that get married. Wallahi, I've witnessed marriages that 24 hours later, they are asking about how divorce is conducted. 24 hours later, asking about how divorce is conducted. How bad could it get in 24 hours? How bad could it get in 24 hours? That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, fear Allah in your women. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ فِيهِنْ. And the last point I wanted to make, divorce is not taboo. Divorce existed at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. If divorce was evil, it wouldn't have been a part of Islam. Divorce is a part of Islam because sometimes there's reasons to do so. However, there are ways to avoid reaching divorce. From it is an example of the Prophet ﷺ. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, I am telling my daughter, marry your cousin. And she said no. So the Prophet ﷺ said to her, obey your father. Listen to your father. She said no. Now, this man is going to the Prophet ﷺ and asking him, come and tell my daughter to listen to me and obey me. He goes, he says, obey your father. She said, no, unless you tell me what the rights and responsibilities of him, this husband of mine, over me. The Prophet ﷺ told her some of the rights and responsibilities of the husband. She said, I cannot fulfill those. I don't want to marry him. The Prophet ﷺ told her father, lay back on her. Let her be. Her question was, what are the rights and responsibilities of this man over me, my husband? There are people here that are married 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years. If I was to ask them what their rights and responsibilities are between them, they would maybe struggle to name them. Knowing the rights and responsibilities, knowing what you have to fulfill before ever taking that step of marriage, before ever approaching marriage. We as a community have a problem where we tend to blame everything but ourselves. You know, when sometimes divorces happen, you speak to people, be like, oh, you know, it's because they had a big wedding. What's that got to do with anything? You know, I knew when they had that rental in their wedding, it was never going to go well. It's because she's from that family. It's because she's like this. It's because he's like that. Blame the problem itself. Don't go and highlight everything, but taking responsibility. Marriage is sacred. And if you are to marry, and marry right, wallahi, there is no greater luxury in this dunya. The Prophet ﷺ said 4 things from the luxuries of this dunya that person should want. A ride that is beautiful, a nice ride, a big house, a good neighborhood, and a righteous spouse. Righteous spouse that aids you on that which is good in this dunya and the akhirah. Ask Allah Azza wa Jal to grant all of those who are single, righteous spouses. Ask Allah Azza wa Jal to grant all of those who are married, peaceful marriages. Ask Allah Azza wa Jal to raise and aid us in overcoming all of our problems and affairs.